Hi everyone and welcome to week 5. Hope you've had a good week and everything's going well for you. At this point we're talking about needs analysis. So training needs analysis, TNA, the specifics of what needs to be trained, and DNA, which is more a broader way of looking at learning, so development needs analysis, as you know. So we're, in terms of learning outcomes today, we're positioning needs within a systematic approach. We're appreciating different types of needs, for example, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and we're distinguishing between levels of needs, organisation, job and individual, and understanding a range of problems in identification of needs. So again, you know, this is something we can really relate to ourselves. If there's something that we need to know, we have to be able to spot that, and that could be from feedback from a supervisor, or it could be just realising from an assignment that we've done, or that, you know, there's something that we haven't quite understood and we need to follow up on that. So a need is something that we understand, I think, implicitly. So in terms of the needs here, we're talking about essentially performance gaps. This diagram gives some insight into that. So it's saying if you were an external consultant, you would be looking for a client request or a customer request for training and development. So you would actually have to determine in this example if there's a performance gap or if there's a high likelihood of one occurring. So if there's anxiety, for example, about new legislation coming in and some difficulties in applying that to your workplace, then that's obviously some sort of need for training. It's important to understand the performance gap and if the reason for that is understood. So if there is a performance gap, if someone's just not able to do all parts of a job, why is that? Is it something to do, say, with work overload? Is there just too much work to do and it's not that the person needs training, it's that the job needs redesigning, reanalysing? Or is it some aspect of the work that they're really not being taught, perhaps? And sometimes performance gaps occur when people are stressed for whatever reason, home or work, and they're just not able to deal with what's in front of them that well. So there's issues in all sorts of ways that can cause a performance gap. But essentially it's important to understand, well, what is the cause of the gap, and is the gap due to an absence of knowledge or skill? So if it's not to do with an absence of knowledge or skill, such as the work overload example that I gave, well, that requires an alternate way to address that performance gap. Obviously, looking into what people are doing, you know, what are the issues? So going to the people who are actually doing that and trying to find a better way of managing. Or you may in fact need a full training needs analysis if you do think that there's something going wrong with the training and development that's occurring. So that could be in the orientation phases, there might be certain aspects missed out. Okay, so this clip here, this YouTube, do have a look at that. It shows a person, one way that you can get do a needs analysis up front in a classroom with a group of people. So this is the performance gap that I've talked about. You can actually see there that there's some sort of identifiable gap, hopefully measurable to some extent. So it could be actual performance. How does that compare with what would ideally be happening with this job? So ideally, perhaps you wouldn't be getting any customer complaints. That would be ideal. So is there anything there that's causing that performance gap? It may be to do with the supply chain. It may be to do with faulty goods being ordered that you're getting these complaints. So it's, there's obviously a myriad of reasons that you could have a performance gap. So we're trying to identify performance gaps that might be to do with training and development. So as I've mentioned, poor performance can be to do with lack of or poor resources. It could be recruitment selection, whereby people are recruited and selected for positions that they don't really have such a good match with. Maybe there's not very good selection processes in place. It could be, as I mentioned, design of the job, where the role is ambiguous, it's confusing. A person may not be exactly sure whether that's their area or not, or, as I mentioned, role overload. And it could be communication processes, so just a breakdown in communication where it's not really clear what's wanted. So this all involves an analysis of issues, any relevant data that you might have. So in the customer complaint example, well, what are the complaints that can help you to identify needs? The costs and the benefits. So what's happening, what effect is this actually having on your business, and what effect is it having on the individuals? Because generally speaking, individuals, they don't want to have the stress of not performing well. So that's a cost to the individual and to the organisation. What are exactly the performance issues, and are there other solutions? So needs may not be fully related to HRD, but they could be partially related to HRD, so there might be some sort of combination of job design and training and development that needed to occur. So this is this familiar diagram. We did identify some additions last week. We talked about the need for a context. Every organisation has got a context. And we talked about this idea of looping back. So once you evaluate activities, that is not the end of the story. It's looping back to say, well, we did identify some needs. Were they rectified, remedied by the training and development that occurred? Or was there something that we needed to do differently about the way we delivered the activities or the design? So that's to do with feedback in the short term and the longer term. So a needs analysis process is actually obviously quite detailed. So just this one step, documenting the problem, investigating it, excuse me, planning what you're going to do, selecting and conducting the needs analysis. So you might decide there's something happening in a department, so you might decide to interview all the members of that department, or you might survey them, or you might observe if it's a situation where the person's performance can be observed. That data is then analysed and then reported upon, and then that is what feeds into the decision about whether you're going to offer training and development, whether it's something else, how that fits together. So this process of needs analysis should be detailed, especially obviously where there's a complex problem. So in essence, where the summary of needs analysis, documenting the problem, planning, selecting the technique, conducting, analysing the data, and using these findings to design your intervention, how you're going to how you're going to propose what's needed. So obviously this is just a cartoon of why it's important. It's easy enough to try and solve a problem, but if it's not the right problem to solve, you're not going to be successful. So needs analysis is often overlooked or poorly done in organisations. And why is that? It can be complicated, it can be expensive, it can be time consuming, but more importantly it's often undervalued. So we often jump to a conclusion. Oh, okay, they need more training. Oh, okay, they need a mentoring process, or just whatever it is, jumping to an intervention without actually going through the process of a proper needs analysis and getting to know people and understand what their issues are. If you don't do this correctly at the beginning, of course, you do end up with the wrong content, objectives or methods in your training programs. Your solutions aren't adequate, productivity is lost, you have dissatisfied customers, even more, money wasted, etc., etc. So there's lots of issues around getting it wrong with needs analysis. So this is really, I guess, a good example of something really huge. The passengers at Terminal 5 in Heathrow Airport. So there was an enormous amount of money put into upgrading the airport, making it a big showcase day of Terminal 5 is opening. But when the report looked into what went wrong, and what went wrong, and you may know this case, is thousands upon thousands of bags were lost, thousands of flights were disrupted for days, and the whole method of getting on this plane was just did not work. And when the review came through, it was actually said that the program of training for many workers had been inadequate. So there were quite a few different problems, and I've included some video clips for you to have a look at about this particular Terminal 5 case in Britain. But a lot of the problems were about training, and some of the issues that came out were that people who were going through training were actually feeding back glitches in the process, etc. And those weren't acted upon. It was just assumed that everything was going to go well on this day, and it was far too much. And so despite all the training that had taken place, they really hadn't done the training that was needed to get this day to go smoothly for people, and also being such a large-scale change at once indicates that they hadn't really thought through the need to take small steps in opening Terminal 5. Okay, so here's two videos that are quite interesting to have a look at, and I'll put them on the main front page too of this week. And it just gives an insight into how things can go so wrong in such an expensive project. So for most of us, we deal with smaller projects, but that initial stage is still really important. So needs arise because of change, short and longer term business objectives. So in the case of Terminal 5, British Airways decided that they needed to just be more effective, more efficient, and able to deal with more people and so that's why this whole upgrade took place. You might need to be looking at new markets and products, some sort of new operation. So you've seen plenty of that, globalisation occurring, looking at different markets, how we're going to access those. Downsizing, of course, we're dealing with, where technology often is taking the place of people. So people are actually leaving, which obviously is downsizing, but there's a lot of needs that arise in that scenario as well, around training and people having actual support and someone to ask and that sort of thing, not losing competence through the system. Multi-skilling if people need to develop a multitude of skills. Okay, other problems are around productivity. Quality might be decreasing in a product. There might be complaints, turnover, absenteeism, etc. So consumers these days have a lot of potential for voice. There was as you know, that there was a biscuit recently that was changed in its recipe shapes, and there was just an absolute outcry that I certainly heard about, and I don't even eat shapes. And apparently I think they're going to change it back. But you know, it's just amazing that the consumer's voice and how loud it can be at times. Also, if you've got a lot of turnover, people leaving, staff leaving, or absenteeism, people not being there, or even there's another problem of presenteeism when people are there but they're not actually being very productive. All these are work problems that can relate back to needs, and it can be needs for training and development. So someone in a leadership role, for example, may need extra help, mentoring, coaching, those sorts of things to deal with really difficult situations. Perhaps not dealing with those situations does lead to things like absenteeism, turnover, etc. Then you've got the whole group of new employees. It goes without saying that new employees should have orientation of some sort to the organisation, to get to know people, to understand the equipment, to be able to really feel part of the organisation, engaged. People often make a decision within a couple of weeks about whether or not they want to stay in an organisation long term. It's very important to orientate people really well to an organisation, to get evaluations about how orientation went, etc. Setting up good communication. But many of you would have experienced, I'm sure, examples of not having a good orientation. But you know, some of you might have had a good experience. So obviously, when we were talking earlier about broad strategic issues, training and development is really central to those, HRD. So, you know, Brisbane City Council is just one example of many who have set up a call centre to try and be responsive. So customers were ringing all sorts of different departments, asking about, you know, some sort of issue to do with a park or a road or whatever, and it was very hard to actually find someone who could answer your question. You know, they'd be out in the field themselves, they didn't get back to the person. So the call centre, there's just one number, you ring through and your problem is either dealt with there or it's referred to someone else, and then there's follow-up processes. But that was a big change, a big move, because all of those people in the call centre, they were new positions, so they needed training first up about working in the call centre, but more importantly, they need a lot of information on the work of Brisbane City Council. How do they answer an engineering problem? At what point do you refer? And that sort of thing. So these sorts of changes in structure and strategy involve a lot of training. So a training need refers to elements of work performance, individual or group, that can be enhanced by an intervention of some sort. And it relates to current work performance or anticipated work requirements, future work requirements. So your orientation processes are often thinking through, you often need to think through, well, what's going to happen in the future? What are the sorts of obstacles this person's going to meet? How can we make sure that they have enough understanding of how things work around here to deal with those things? So types of needs, there's knowledge. There can be knowledge about strategies, policies, procedures, technical standards and operation of equipment. So that's what orientation is often about, isn't it, at the beginning? You know, what are the really important policies that we've got here? The strategy, you know, what is it? How do we fit into that? And people feeling enthusiastic about a strategy is important, that they feel part of it and they understand that. So our work on strategy links into this, and that chapter that I gave you to read from Built to Last, that book, is really interesting because it sets out some of those visions of the visionary companies. And so that's, you know, in those early days, people organisations are hoping that people understand the strategy and where they're going, the vision, etc., and become enthusiastic about it. There can be skills such as serving customers, report writing, how do we solve problems around here, whether that's technically or face-to-face interpersonal problems, leadership and teamwork. So they are all skills that can link into needs. Competence we talked about earlier, just that the need to build competence has been a big a big challenge for us in Australia. And the other one is attitudes. So attitudes to work, to customers, health and safety training, and the employing organisation. So obviously we want people in an organisation to feel positive towards it, but you can have troubles, customers. Sometimes if we have biases or prejudice against certain types of people, that can come through in our customers, to our customers, how we interact with our customers, sorry. So that's why you see organisations undertaking training in diversity, training in interpersonal communication. That's more around attitudes. It can be a skill of interpersonal communication, but it's also around the thinking, what's in your head about those aspects. Health and safety, obviously you can learn what to do, but it's an attitude about whether you actually take it on board, whether you believe it's important. So there's also levels of TNA, the personal level, the individual, what do I actually need at the moment in this job to do a good job. There's a level more about the actual job. This is one way of thinking about it. Is the job changing? Has it changed? What are the specifics of this job that I need to do? And then the organisational level is there something that needs to happen across the organisation? So there might, if you're getting customer complaints, it could be something to do with the way products are being brought in and sold to customers, for example. So just, I think just that awareness of, is it an individual need, or is it something to do with the job that maybe is quite complicated, or the organisation? To find out how are you going to research or assess those needs, sometimes there's a lot written down. Business plans, documents you can find, the strategic plan, copies of complaints, maybe even exit interviews that have been done, just what is going on at that organisational level. And obviously there's the big picture issues around maybe big staff surveys, what information can you find out. Job analysis, finding out from people about how the job is analysed, how it should be working, and then individuals. Obviously there's observation, feedback, individual appraisal, performance appraisal, as you understand, would feed into this whole setup, and self-assessment. So if you get in a situation you feel like you're struggling with it, that's a self-assessment that things are difficult for you. So, and just as some questions, is it really a learning and development training need? Two departments merging, would that be a need for training and development? Quite often it could be, to learn about how the other department actually operates, what are the things that are important to it, how are you going to mutually carry out tasks. Declining profitability, again, could be, has to be investigated. Is profitability declining because of some HRD issue, or is it simply because markets are changing or whatever? Are there other issues? Marketing needs to be addressed, for example. Reports of workplace bullying, often that could be about the organisational culture, the way that we do things around here. People might just not not be very positive in that organisation. Number 4, recruitment of new employees for busy Christmas period. Obviously, yes, that's a need, a training need. 5, several employees can't handle angry customers on the phone. That could be a training need, that the person needs better training in communication on the phone and handling people who are upset. But I think more deeply, why are those customers upset? Is there something wrong with the actual product or the service that needs attention, and it's just the person on the phone who's getting all this abuse? 6, one person can't be bothered using safety equipment. Again, that would be subject to investigation. Perhaps there's a lack of understanding of what's being taught, or a lack of respect, or whatever, so that might need an individual follow-up. And if someone or a team can't handle the volume of work, again, that's investigation. So there's a lot of questions that you need to ask, and there's a lot of room for investigation, trying to work out if it is a HRD need or not, or its other solution is needed. There's often a complex mix of factors in identifying issues and problems within a political contest. There might be conflicting priorities, competition for scarce resources, etc. So if you're working in a large university, for example, there might be a particular department or research centre that has a lot of focus at the moment because of government policy or needs of students or whatever. So funding between departments can be quite competitive. So there's a whole mix of factors that come into identifying needs. So it might be hard for one department to get ahead if they're not getting really the funding they need, because it's going to another area that's either been able to demonstrate that they need the funding more, or it's an area that the university, say, wants to promote. Another problem is that you can have difficulty accessing reliable and valid data. If you're focused on what's going wrong, currently it's hard to sort of think about the bigger picture, but in our discussions on strategy, we really talked about that, the importance of the longer term vision. If we need to also be aware, and I think this speaks to Cantor's idea of zoom in and zoom out. If we zoom in too much, we can be too narrow. What specifically needs training for this job at this time, which is important, but zoom out tells us that there could be problems within the wider learning culture. So perhaps there aren't enough mentoring opportunities in that organisation, not enough learning opportunities. And also another problem can be just this idea of stakeholders and power bases. So some people, some groups can be more powerful in their lobbying. So that's an issue. You need to see past that and try and get to the bottom of the real problem. So in overview, needs is talking about a gap in present desired knowledge, skills or attitudes. It's also useful to think about levels: organisation, job, occupation and individual. And it's important to talk about what techniques will you use to generate information. Obviously, trying to work out the needs of an individual is going to be different to a whole organisation. So individual might be just a discussion, might be some observation, might be a better performance management process. But, you know, there might be something across the whole organisation that is needed. So could be performance management across the whole organisation. So different techniques are needed to be able to generate information to meet the needs, and there are a complex mix of factors: the political context, its current and future requirements, that all come into the mix and address that question of, well, why isn't training needs analysis or development needs analysis done well a lot of the time. These are some of the reasons. So have a think about organisations that you know and how you might access information about training and development needs from that organisation, or have a think about yourself and how you identify your own needs, your own training and development needs. You've obviously been through that process in enrolling here, so think you could think that through. Okay, so a need is a discrepancy between expectations and performance. Not only performance needs are involved, so we need to consider the broader context. So this cartoon boss, the entire team has been trained on process optimization. That's wonderful. And a month later we've lost 3 customers because we did not deliver on time. Well, everyone said the training was fun, they had a good time. So this cartoon speaks to that idea that we're going to move on to in the future about the need to evaluate. So you can evaluate the end of a training session. Yes, 100%, great. But that learning may not be transferred very effectively back into the organisation. So everything is important in this process, from needs through to evaluation. So in conclusion, needs analysis is an integral part of HRD process. It's interconnected with all parts of the 4-stage diagram, i.e. evaluation should relate to initial needs and to other needs that may be identified. You need a systematic research approach to identifying needs, whether it's surveys, interviews, observations, reading data, reports. It is often overlooked, and that can be for many reasons, which I've already mentioned, but could be the cost of surveys, the cost of interviews, or the cost of having someone observe someone else, lack of understanding of its importance, and also the issue around political lobbying for resources. That's not really based on valid research, it's just someone with the loudest voice. Have a read through the readings for this week, please. They do offer some interesting perspectives on the process. So from next week we're going to look more at design and delivery of HRD and evaluation. Thanks very much, and if you can have a look on the site and just see where we're up to, and I hope the assignments are going well, etc. Okay, see ya.